You know, when my grandson called 911 last month because his daughter had a high fever, I watched that ambulance pull up in 7 minutes. And I thought to myself, we didn't have that. We didn't have those three numbers to dial. We didn't have paramedics rushing to our door. And yet somehow we survived. Somehow entire generations made it through emergencies that would have us panicking today. So sit with me for a bit and let me tell you how American families actually handled the moments when everything went wrong, because what they did might just surprise you. My name is Frances Walker. I'm 59 years old and I taught history for 33 years before I retired. But the history I want to share today isn't from a textbook. It's from the living rooms and front porches and kitchen tables of the people who raised me. My grandmother was born in 1911, my mother in 1939. And the stories they told me about handling emergencies, well, they painted a picture of a America that was tougher, more connected, and in some ways more prepared than we are now. Let me take you back to a time before 911 existed, because here's something most people don't realize. 911 as a nationwide emergency number only started in 1968, and it took until the late 1980s before it covered most of the country. Before that, you were on your own in ways that are hard to imagine today. Picture this, it's 1955. A farmer in rural Iowa has a tractor roll over on his leg. His wife hears him screaming from 100 yards away. What does she do? She can't pull out a cell phone. There's no cell phone. She runs to the house. But here's the thing, she doesn't call 911. That doesn't exist. She picks up that heavy black rotary phone and she calls the operator, not a number, the operator, a real woman sitting at a switchboard in town. And she says, Mabel, it's Eleanor. John's trapped under the tractor. I need help. And Mabel, who knows everyone in that county, starts making calls. She calls Doc Henderson. She calls the neighbors. She calls the volunteer fire department. Within 20 minutes, 6 men are there lifting that tractor, and the doctor is already examining the leg. That was the system. It was people. It was relationships. It was knowing your operator's name. Now, let me tell you what happened when someone had a heart attack, because this was before CPR was widely known. My grandmother told me about her father, my great grandfather, who collapsed in the front yard in 1946. She was 16 years old. Her mother started screaming, and within minutes, neighbors came running, not because anyone called them, because they heard the screaming and came running. One neighbor had a car. They lifted my great grandfather into that back seat and they drove him 12 miles to the nearest hospital, running every stop sign, honking the horn the whole way. My grandmother sat in the back, holding her father's head, praying he'd keep breathing. He survived that heart attack. But here's what stayed with me. She said the neighbor who drove them never asked for gas money, never brought it up. It was just understood. That's what you did. Before 911, emergencies were community events. Everyone understood that today it might be your emergency, but tomorrow it might be theirs. So you showed up, you helped, you didn't wait to be asked. Let me talk about childbirth for a moment, because this is where it gets really interesting. My mother was born at home in 1939. Her mother, my grandmother, went into labor in the evening. Her husband rode his bicycle 2 miles in the dark to get the midwife. Not a doctor, a midwife, Mrs. Kowalski. She was a Polish woman who had delivered half the babies in that town. She came with her bag of supplies, boiled water on the stove, and delivered my mother in the upstairs bedroom while my grandfather waited downstairs with his two other children. There was no hospital 20 minutes away. There was no ultrasound to check if everything was okay. There was experience, intuition, and prayer. And here's the remarkable thing. Mrs. Kowalski had delivered over 300 babies by the time she retired. She knew which births were dangerous. She knew when to tell a husband to go get the doctor from the next town. She saved lives because she had knowledge that had been passed down through generations of women. When 911 came along, we gained speed and technology, but we lost something too. We lost that deep community-based knowledge of how to handle things ourselves. Let me tell you about fires because this terrified me as a child when I heard these stories. In the 1940s and 50s, house fires were deadly common. Wood stoves, kerosene heaters, faulty wiring, homes just burned. My uncle's house caught fire in 1952, middle of winter, middle of the night. My aunt smelled smoke, woke everyone up, and they ran outside in their night clothes. No shoes, snow on the ground. The house was already engulfed. My uncle ran to the neighbor's house, pounded on the door, and that neighbor called the volunteer fire department. But here's the thing about volunteer fire departments back then. These were farmers and shop owners. They had to get out of bed, get dressed, drive to the fire station, get the truck, and then drive to the fire. By the time they arrived, my uncle's house was gone, just gone. They saved the barn. That was it. But what happened next is what matters. Within 2 days, men from the community showed up with lumber. Within a week, they had framed a new house. Women brought food every single day. Other families took in my aunt and uncle and their 4 children for 3 months until the house was livable again. Nobody asked for payment. Nobody sent a bill. That was the insurance policy. The community was the insurance policy. Now, let me tell you something about injuries because this is where you see how much tougher people were. My grandfather cut 3 of his fingers badly with a saw in his workshop. This was 1958. He wrapped them in a dish towel, had my grandmother drive him to Doc Miller's house, not an emergency room, his actual house. And Doc Miller stitched him up right there on his kitchen table. 12 stitches, no anesthetic. My grandfather told me he bit down on a leather strap and just endured it. Doc Miller charged him $5. My grandfather paid him with a dozen eggs and a smoked ham. That was medicine before 911. It was personal. It was local. Your doctor knew your name, knew your family, and often lived right in your town. When someone got seriously hurt, you went to the doctor's house. You knocked on the door, and he came day or night. That was the expectation. Let me talk about something we don't think about much anymore. Getting lost. Before cell phones, before GPS, before 911, people got lost all the time. Hunters in the woods, children wandering too far from home, elderly folks with dementia walking away. What happened? The community organized search parties. My mother told me about a little boy who went missing in 1951. He was 4 years old, wandered away from his farm. Within an hour, every able-bodied person in that township was walking through fields and woods calling his name. They found him 4 hours later asleep under a tree 2 miles from home. Over 100 people searched for that child. Nobody called a police department. Nobody waited for professionals. You just went. There was an understanding that a child belongs to the whole community, not legally, but morally. If a child was in danger, every adult was responsible. That's just how it was. Now, let me tell you about poisonings because this happened more than you'd think. Cleaning products weren't labeled like they are now. Medicines didn't have child-proof caps. My mother told me about a neighbor child who drank kerosene in 1945. The mother ran to every house on the street screaming for help. One woman knew you had to make the child vomit. Another woman ran to get the doctor. Another woman took the other children so the mother could focus. The child survived because multiple women had bits of knowledge and they acted fast. There was no poison control center to call. You relied on what people knew and you prayed it was enough. Let me tell you about strokes and seizures because people didn't always know what they were seeing. My grandmother witnessed a man have a seizure at church in 1948. People thought he was possessed. They held him down and prayed over him. Now we know that was a seizure, and you shouldn't restrain someone like that. But they didn't know. They did what they thought was right. When he came out of it, they took him home and watched over him. His family didn't leave him alone for weeks, afraid it would happen again. There was no neurologist to see, no medication to control seizures, just vigilance and care. Here's something that might make you uncomfortable, but it's true. Not everyone survived emergencies back then. The infant mortality rate was higher. People died from infections we can cure with antibiotics now. Farmers died in accidents that today would be survivable with trauma surgery. Women died in childbirth at rates that would horrify us now. The lack of 911, the lack of fast emergency response, it cost lives. I don't want to romanticize the past and pretend it was better. In many ways, we are so much safer now. But here's what I want you to understand. The people back then weren't careless. They weren't unprepared. They prepared differently. Every household had basic medical supplies, bandages, iodine, aspirin, castor oil, witch hazel. Women knew how to stitch wounds. Men knew how to set broken bones, at least well enough to get someone to a doctor. Children were taught from a young age what to do if something went wrong. Don't panic. Get help. Know your neighbors. My grandmother kept a list of phone numbers written on the wall next to the telephone. The doctor, the fire chief, her sister, her closest neighbor. In an emergency, you didn't have to fumble through a phone book. The numbers were right there. That list stayed on that wall for 40 years. Let me tell you about another thing we've lost. The knowledge of home remedies. Now, I'm not saying these replaced real medical care, but when a doctor was an hour away and it was the middle of the night, people had to do something. My mother treated earaches with warm oil, croup with steam from a boiling kettle, cuts with honey to prevent infection, and it actually works because honey is antibacterial. Fevers with cool baths and willow bark tea, which contains the same compound as aspirin. These weren't superstitions. These were tested methods passed down through generations. When 911 came along, we started calling for help instead of handling things ourselves. And in serious emergencies, that's wonderful. That saves lives. But we also lost confidence in our own abilities. We lost that knowledge base. How many people today could handle even a minor emergency without panicking and calling for help? Let me tell you what I think the real difference was. Back then, people understood that emergencies were inevitable. You couldn't prevent every accident, every illness, every disaster. So you prepared mentally. You accepted that life was fragile. And you built a network of people who would show up when things went wrong. That network was stronger than any emergency number. I remember my grandmother saying, "Why we took care of our own." And she didn't mean just family. She meant the community, the town, the people within reach. You took care of your own because you were someone's own too. Today, we have incredible emergency services. We have technology that saves lives every single day. But we've also become isolated. We don't know our neighbors the way people did back then. We don't have that automatic network of people who come running when they hear a scream. We've traded community for professionalism, and maybe we've lost something in that trade. I'm not saying we should go back. I'm grateful for 911. I'm grateful for paramedics and emergency rooms and all the medical advances we have now. But I do think we can learn something from how our grandparents and great grandparents handled emergencies. We can learn to be a little tougher, a little more knowledgeable, a little more connected to the people around us. Because the truth is, even with 911, there are moments when help can't get there fast enough. And in those moments, you need to know what to do. You need to have people who will show up. You need that old wisdom. My grandmother lived to be 92 years old. She survived a childhood without antibiotics, raised 6 children without 911, and lived through more emergencies than I can count. And you know what she told me near the end of her life? She said, "We didn't think we were brave. We just did what needed doing." That's the heart of it, isn't it? They didn't have a choice, so they rose to the occasion every single time. So the next time you pick up that phone to dial 911, and I hope you never have to, take just a moment to appreciate what a gift that is. And maybe also take a moment to think about who you could count on if that phone didn't work. Who would come running? Who would know what to do? And would you be that person for someone else? Because that's what they had back then. They had each other. And in the end, maybe that was the strongest emergency system of all. Thank you for sitting with me and listening to these old stories. They matter. They really do.